Eden Zero is just the science fantasy manga we needed. As much as I love Dr. Stone, that's only science fiction. Eden Zero is an amazing story filled with aliens, ancient space magic, and even space pirates. Plus it's got plenty of great characters and a story that already has me hooked after just 3 volumes. That's why in this video I'm gonna explain why you should read Eden Zero. Be warned that this video will contain some minor spoilers. Before I get started, make sure to comment with your thoughts on Eden Zero. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week in the next video. This week's comment goes to Illustrious Elucidation for sharing their thoughts on one of my favorite Dr. Stone characters. If you'd like more anime and manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. So to get started, let's quickly go over what Eden Zero is all about. If you do a quick search on YouTube, there's a small chance you'll find videos comparing Eden Zero to Fairy Tail. Almost like when someone doesn't know what to say about a female character, so they just say she's better than Sakura. Now, as you can probably tell by the art style, this is no coincidence. Eden Zero is a story by the same person behind Fairy Tail, Hiro Mashima. And while there are some clear similarities, I have no intention of dedicating the next, 10 minutes or so to explaining why Eden Zero is just Fairy Tail in space. Because quite frankly, Eden Zero is much more than that. Like I said earlier, Eden Zero is a science fantasy, which should be pretty self-explanatory, but let's make sure we're extra clear on that. This is not a science fiction story like Dr. Stone, where the story takes place in our universe but with one important invention or major event. Eden Zero takes place in a completely different universe with almost inexplicable phenomena. In other words, all the bizarre creatures and technology can usually just be explained by ether, basically the magic of this universe. And even though I love that a story like Dr. Stone goes out of its way to stay scientifically accurate, I also love Eden Zero because I don't need to think about whether everything that happens is realistic. And this is also why I've been enjoying Eden Zero more than Fairy Tail. Because Fairy Tail is only a fantasy story, so it's tied to what one would normally expect out of a fantasy story. But since Eden Zero is a science fantasy story, it can really do whatever it wants. Fortunately, this is exactly what Mashima does in the story. He blends the more typical fantasy tropes within this futuristic universe, blessing readers with the kind of story where the main character can control gravity, the other characters can all use weapons powered by space magic, and there's Sakura petals and dragons out in space. And that's just the stuff I can mention without any major spoilers. Which is exactly why I've been hooked on Eden Zero after just a few chapters. Mashima blends fantasy elements like magic with science fiction elements like robots to create the story where I'm not necessarily thinking about how everything works, and I never really know what to expect. But speaking of robots, let's move on to one of the other reasons you should read Eden Zero. As a shonen manga, Eden Zero doesn't exactly shy away from the classic friendship trope. And if you're even the least bit familiar with Fairy Tail, then this shouldn't be much of a surprise. But as far as I've read, none of the characters get some kind of insane ability just because someone hurt their friend. At most, you'll get some cliché scenes where the characters talk about how important their friends are. Again, if you're a shonen fan like me, then this is nothing new. But Mashima doesn't just rely on the whole friendship trope. In the first few pages, the main character, Shiki, has a conversation with his grandfather. You know, the robot demon king, nothing out of the ordinary. Anyway, Shiki listens as his grandfather explains that everyone, people and machines alike, have a heart, and so everyone can be friends because we all have hearts. So while friendship is obviously important to the story, it's only one element of the narrative. Another important element is this theme of people and machines living together as equals, which is especially true in this universe where people and machines live side by side and the machines are almost indistinguishable from humans thanks to advanced technology. But of course, humans wouldn't be humans if we didn't throw in some good old-fashioned discrimination. As you might expect from a futuristic story, humans often discriminate against the robots and androids, treating them as if they're really nothing more than machines. Which might make sense in 2021 when we're still trying to figure out AI robots, but in a universe where you can barely tell the difference between robots and humans, things get pretty complicated. I mean, think about it. If the robots don't really look like machines, and a lot of the humans have even modified their bodies like cyborgs, then where do you draw the line? Well, as Shiki learned from his grandfather and all the other robots who raised him, there is no line. Everyone has a heart, and so everyone should be treated equally. So on top of the characters protecting their friends, they also work against the all too familiar problem of discrimination by respecting everyone's inherent value as a living being. Again, I can't say too much without giving away any spoilers, but these themes of equality, discrimination, and what it means to be a person only become more important as the story goes on. And this is one of the other reasons why I've been enjoying Eden Zero so much. Although it uses friendship as one of its themes like in many other shonen, Eden Zero also offers the kind of story where the characters often fight against discrimination and work to create a better world. Now, I've already mentioned one of them, but let's talk about the characters in Eden Zero and why they're so fun to follow. If I had to boil it down, I'd say the main reason these characters are so entertaining is because they have this great chemistry as a team, even though they're all pretty different. And before I get any comments about it, yes, there are a couple of characters borrowed from Fairy Tail. If I'm being honest though, the only real bad case of this is Elsie Crimson. I mean, come on Mashima, Happy I can deal with because you really weren't even trying to hide it, but really? You really put Erza Scarlet, one of the most iconic girls in all of anime, in your story and tried to change her name like we wouldn't notice? Come on man, Elsie Crimson isn't even clever. But in all seriousness, that really is the worst of it. Like I said, at least there's no playing around with Happy. The Happy in Eden Zero has pretty much the same personality as the Happy in Fairy Tail. But this Happy actually has a pretty cool ability which is honestly way better than in Fairy Tail. I won't say anything else about that because it's pretty epic once it gets revealed. Now, with Happy, we're also introduced to Rebecca. And Rebecca is probably the most relatable character in the group. As a kid, Rebecca never had any friends until she met Happy. At that point, the two of them decided to be friends so they wouldn't have to be alone anymore. Even if you're not a cat person, you have to admit that's pretty goddamn wholesome. But one of the most interesting aspects of Rebecca's character is her dream of becoming a famous B-Cuber, B-Cube serving as the YouTube of this universe. Now, as wild a dream as that may seem, it's actually pretty normal when you consider that more and more people are making careers out of YouTube these days, and kids are telling their teachers now that they want to grow up and become YouTubers. Unfortunately, Rebecca has only had very modest success in the B-Cube game, which as a small YouTuber myself is such a mood. Now, in that quest of hers, Rebecca visits the planet Granbell. This is where we're introduced to Shiki. And Shiki is a lot like Kid Goku. Because he grew up as the only human on an abandoned planet, Shiki is completely unaccustomed to the many conventions of the modern world. But like I mentioned earlier, his grandfather instilled in him this strong desire to make plenty of friends. So Shiki ends up being this really bizarre character who goes as far as saying he literally wants to make 100 friends, but often runs into trouble because of his upbringing. Fortunately, Rebecca sees that Shiki is a good person and decides to take him to see the world outside of his home. Now, as Rebecca, Happy, and Shiki begin exploring, they eventually run into the last three characters I'll mention, Wise, Pino, and Homura. Wise is basically just blonde Han Solo. He runs into a fair bit of not-so-legal activity, and he's an unapologetic sleazeball, but at the end of the day, he's a really good guy who always protects his friends. Plus, he's really good with machines and whatnot thanks to his ether gear. After Wise, the team runs into Pino. Pino is a cute little robot who, for unknown reasons, was left behind by her creator. As a result, she has no idea why she was created or what she should be doing. But when Shiki treats her as someone worth fighting for, Pino decides to join his team and find her path in life. Finally, we have Homura. And Homura is another bizarre character like Shiki. She's this beautiful badass who can absolutely dominate people with her swordsmanship, but often speaks what she's thinking out loud and is honestly kind of a meathead. So even though Homura has this cool and stoic personality, it's kind of undermined by the fact that she shares a single brain cell with Shiki. And that actually goes back to my point about why this cast works so well. You have a meathead with minimal social skills, an equally meatheaded samurai girl, an aspiring YouTuber and her cat, a naive robot, and a sleazy engineer with very questionable ethics. On paper, these characters have no business together as a team, but because each of them is interesting on their own, and because they all go out of their way to play an active role in each other's lives, it's hard not to find yourself invested in each of the characters and their adventure as a team. So just to quickly recap, this is why you should read Eden Zero. For the wild fantasy setting, the themes of friendship and equality, and the misfit gang of lovable goofballs who work together to explore the universe. And that's it for this discussion. If you enjoyed this discussion, then make sure to like the video. Also make sure to follow me on Twitch, where I discuss Dr. Stone and other Shonen Jump manga every Sunday. And if you'd like more anime and manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.